This is the story of the servant of God Frank Duff, a man whom God used to extend the work for the salvation of souls beyond the priests and religious to the lay faithful and the ordinary Catholics. He believed greatly that everyone has been called to become saints, whether they were religious people or ordinary Catholics, and that we have everything we need to cultivate and sustain a holy life. Frank Duff was born in Dublin on June 7, 1889. He was the eldest of 7 children to John Duff and Susan Freehill. His father and his mother were both civil servants in the British Civil Service. They were a well-to-do family because Frank's granduncle, who had emigrated during the year 1847 famine, and made a fortune in America, left it to John Duff's father. Frank's grandfather was a school teacher and used his money to acquire a large library of books which in turn were passed on to John and to which Frank had access as he grew up. He attended Blackrock College in Dublin, where he was an excellent student. Frank excelled in languages and modern literature. This explains why he had such a large collection of theology books in his library in English, Latin, and French. Although a good sportsman, Frank was shy when it came to drama or any form of oratory. He had the misfortune of being hit behind the ear by a cricket ball during these years, which impaired his hearing for the rest of his life and which was a great cross to him. Frank's life was not without its share of tragedy. During his school years, both Frank and his father caught typhoid. Frank recovered, but his father was forced to retire through ill health from the civil service at the age of 42 on only a partial pension. Susan, his mother, had already left work to raise her family. Frank thus became the breadwinner of the family as soon as he left school in 1907. He too joined the civil service. 2 of his sisters died in childhood. And, while his 2 other sisters, financed by Frank, studied to become doctors, one of them too became sick and had to remain at home with the family. Frank soon became a respected man in the civil service. He possessed a keen intellect, a strong sense of discipline and a good sense of humor. He never really liked math at school but set himself to learn all about it after he left school and invented a new set of calculus which he was sent to teach to the Treasury Department in London because of the increased efficiency it offered. Frank grew in wisdom and knowledge of his faith too at this time. He loved to read and he devoured book after book on the lives of the saints. He was faithful to Mass and to his rosary and often visited a church while he was young. But it was not until he joined the Society of St. Vincent de Paul in 1913 at the age of 24 that his faith took a new turn. Normally a high society man, Frank was now exposed to the real poverty of Dublin of that time. Many who lived in filthy houses were forced to attend soup kitchens for sustenance, and some of the natural consequences of abject poverty, alcoholism, and prostitution were abundant in Dublin. Frank fell in with a wonderful group of upstanding Catholic men in the conference he joined and soon rose through the ranks to conference secretary and president of St. Patrick's Conference in Myra House, in St. Nicholas of Myra Parish in the heart of Dublin. Frank's concern for the materially deprived soon developed into a concern for the spiritually malnourished. It was his idea to begin discouraging the Protestant soup kitchens and to set up a rival Catholic soup kitchen instead. He joined forces with Sergeant Major Joe Gabet, who was already at this work of discouraging those entering the Protestant soup kitchens, and over the years succeeded in closing down 2 of them. The Protestant soup kitchens gave birth to the term souperism. Souperism was a phenomenon of the Irish potato famine. It involved Protestant Bible societies who set up schools in which starving children were fed, on the condition of receiving Protestant-based religious instruction at the same time. Its practitioners had to choose between their faith and starvation. People who converted for food were known as soupers because they took the soup, and this term was continually applied and featured in the press well into the 1870s. In 1916, aged 27, he published his first pamphlet, Can We Be Saints? In it he expressed one of the strongest convictions of his life, namely, that all without exception are called to be saints, and that through our Catholic faith we have available all the means necessary to attain this. In 1917 he came to know the treatise of Saint Louis Marie de Montfort on the true devotion to Mary, a work which changed his life completely and inspired him to found the Legion of Mary. On September 7, 1921, Frank Duff founded the Legion of Mary. This is a lay apostolic organization at the service of the Church. Its twofold purposes: 1. The spiritual development of its members, and 2. Advancing the reign of Christ on earth. The Legion, which is to be found in almost every country in the world, has nearly 3 million active members who performs works of mercy on weekly basis, and many more auxiliary members who offer prayers for the spiritual growth of the movement. The spirituality of Frank Duff. All of this went hand in hand with a rapid growth in Frank's own spirituality. Having joined the Society of St. Vincent in 1913, the following Lent of 1914, Frank decided to go to Mass every day, but was not satisfied to stop at Easter Sunday, and continued his daily attendance at Mass thereafter. In fact, Finola Kennedy revealed in her book that Frank attended 2 Masses daily from 1914 onwards to the day he died in 1980. Frank attended his first enclosed retreat in 1913 with the Society of St. Vincent de Paul and was deeply moved by it. He subsequently organized 2 retreats every year, according to Father Bradshaw, pages 27, 28. And made his annual retreat in Mount Melleray every year for 48 years until he was unable to make the journey. Frank himself, writing to Pope Paul VI in 1964, was able to say that from 1914 he never missed his daily rosary. In 1914 Frank joined the Pioneers' Total Abstinence Association, a pious organization in the Church that practiced devotions to the Sacred Heart of Jesus and a total abstinence from drinking alcohol. The Pioneers wore a symbol called the Pioneer Pin, which had an image of the Sacred Heart, as a means to advertise the organization and to alert others not to offer them alcohol. But Frank disliked the idea of wearing a public religious emblem and refused the idea at first, but, realizing that this was just his pride, he returned to take the pledge and never looked back. He always wore his pin and recited the Pioneer Prayer. Spiritual reading was an important part of his everyday life, but he coupled this with regular confession and spiritual direction. From 1915 to 1922, Father Robert Bradshaw tells us that Frank used to spend 4 hours every day in prayer. He used to make a lunchtime holy hour while at work, and all this time he was under the direction of a Jesuit priest by the name of Father Michael Brown. In 1965 Pope Paul VI invited Frank Duff to attend the Second Vatican Council as a lay observer, an honor by which the Pope recognized and affirmed his enormous work for the lay apostolate. On November 7, 1980, Frank Duff died and is buried in Glasnevin Cemetery, Dublin. In July 1996 the cause of his canonization was introduced by the Archbishop of Dublin, Dr. Desmond Connell. The official petition to introduce the cause for the beatification of Frank Duff was accepted and signed by His Grace Archbishop Desmond Connell in July 1996. Frank Duff is now known under the title, Servant of God. One of the major stages in the process for a person to be declared a saint is the verification of heroic sanctity by means of a detailed investigation through the appropriate office in Rome, formalized by the issue of a solemn decree. The person may then be said to be a venerable, which means to be regarded with awe. An example is Edel Quinn. So, when it comes to the life and work of Frank Duff, we are at the stage of determining the truth of his life and virtue to prove that he is worthy of the title of venerable. This is the first step in the process, which will judge if Frank Duff's life was one of heroic sanctity. Favorable and unfavorable witnesses have to be interviewed and questioned under oath, and his writings will have to be examined by theologians to check their fidelity to the faith and the moral teaching of the Church. This process will be a lengthy one, since many persons who knew Frank have to be interviewed and his prolific writings have to be carefully examined. Frank lived a long life, born on June 7, 1889 and died on November 7, 1980. That means he lived for 91 years. He did not found the Legion of Mary until he was 32 years of age. In the following 59 years he wrote an estimated 200,000 letters. He has written 205 different articles compiled into several books. There are about 9 hours of video of a taped interview with him that is available, all of which are transcribed, and there are about 140 audio tapes of interviews, about which 50% of which have been transcribed at this stage. Frank Duff has affected the life of many through the Legion of Mary and is still transforming lives by the intense idealism of the Legion, and his memory will never be lost, for he gave his life to the service of the Creator of the universe. The end.